Hello and welcome everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining in from today. Welcome to another live session at the Reactors. My name is Rav and I'm the program manager at Reactor London. Before we get into the session, please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We're all here to learn, so please be respectful of other people's opinions, understanding of differences, and please be kind and considerate in the way you engage. The chat will be open throughout, and we do encourage you all to participate. Also, please note that this session will be recorded and will be available to view on our Reactor YouTube channel immediately. Today is the last episode of the SaaS Academy Tech Track. Let me give you a little bit of background. This is a joint program brought to you by Microsoft Western Europe, Microsoft UK, and Microsoft Reactor. SaaS Academy was inspired by our CEO's vision that every company will eventually become a software company. And here is a quick video on SaaS Academy.
Did you know that every business will eventually become a software business? Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella not only made that prediction, but also continues to lead Microsoft to SaaSify its portfolio. With SaaS solutions, you can grow your business and make even sophisticated enterprise applications like ERP and CRM affordable if you lack the resources to buy, deploy, and manage your infrastructure and software. So, how to get started with SaaS? That's why we created the Microsoft SaaS Academy. It is your chance to deep dive into the latest Microsoft technologies and learn more about the future of software as a service from Microsoft experts, partners, and customers. Our SaaS Academy was designed with a business track and a tech track to provide companies like yours with the SaaS knowledge that fulfills their needs. Our business track covers the SaaS fundamentals, whether you are a cloud-native company or a traditional software provider, while the tech track addresses technical aspects of building a SaaS solution, including SaaS architecture, DevOps, and sustainable software engineering. You can get started with SaaS in the same time it would take you to build a Microsoft PowerPoint about it. Ready to accelerate your journey to SaaS? Don't miss our upcoming webinars and join the Microsoft SaaS Academy now.
Well, I hope you enjoy the video. I'm now going to bring Doreen, the co-founder of the SaaS Academy, who will introduce the session. Over to you, Doreen.
Thank you, Rav. Oh my God, I am so excited. This is the last episode of SaaS Academy for this year. And this has been an amazing journey for us. And I want to take this opportunity and thank everyone who have been watching us and joining our webinars and took a part of this journey to create future SaaS. Today, I have two special guest speakers with us today, and that's Mike and Sander, two of my colleagues. Mike is from Belgium, Sander from the Netherlands. I've been working with them for 2 years now, almost, very close, and I'm super grateful they have taken the time to share their knowledge and expertise about identity. Today's session, it is going to focus on the identity angle of security. You know, we have identity, we have data, we have devices, and we have applications. But like Sander just told me before we started, hackers don't hack, they log in, which means every organization in the world who want to act and improve their security should start by focusing on identity. That's the main topic for today. Without further ado, I welcome Mike to open the session. Have fun, guys.
Okay, thank you for your kind words, Doreen. It's nice to be working together for once. Also with my fellow colleague from the Netherlands. Hi, Sander. Good afternoon.
Hi, everybody.
So let's talk a little bit about what the agenda is today. So we're going to talk about identity, specifically founded into the hemisphere of the ISVs. Identity based for your SaaS applications that you're building. Typically, everybody who's the audience here will be an independent software vendor, and we're going to talk to you about where this highlights in your ecosystem. So first, I'm going to give you a little overview on what zero trust is, because this is actually the foundation for everything that we're going to discuss. And then afterwards, I will hand over to our dear friend Sander, who will guide you through how to build an application with identity in mind and how to integrate this with Azure Active Directory, and also what the benefits are from these perspectives, because there's a couple of things that will come along with it. Now, when we talk about zero trust, I'm first going to bring it back to a little bit more to the cloud foundations that we have. We as Microsoft, we provide you with tools and services to build solutions that can make you become world leaders in building software. Now, the thing is that there's also something underneath the covers that comes with responsibility in mind. The shared responsibility model is nothing new, but in mind of security, that shared responsibility becomes very important. Why is that? Because you have a certain responsibility, not only when you're building your own software and managing everything, but also towards your customers. And your customers also have a responsibility on that. If they're using a SaaS, they are responsible for all the things that they are putting in there and who's working with this software. Yeah. You are responsible for maintaining that, everything underneath the underlying architecture and the underlying infrastructure. So this is very important to know. Why is this so important, and what is this in the light of zero trust? Well, maybe I should explain you first what zero trust is. Zero trust is trusting no one and nothing, meaning that whatever you're gonna do, whatever you're gonna fit in, you want to make sure that you have all boundaries strict, that there's monitoring all over the place, that you're going to have a new way of highlighting all these issues that are going to go over with, and that you have things in place like policies, that you're going to take a look on how your telemetry is flowing through your application. But also from a customer perspective, you shouldn't be always trusting any kind of application that you're working with. Now, if we put these principles to 3 pillars, there's actually 3 things that are important. First of all is the explicit verification. Make sure that every user is known, whether on its identity and its location, that they are working from a healthy environment, specifically on their devices. As Doreen already said, it's not only about applications, it's also about identity and devices and data. Here we have it. Make also sure that you have information protection with data classification and anomaly triggering, and have yourself a very good context on the workload or the service that you're offering. So all these things, all these data points need to be validated always, specifically in the part of the identity. Authentication and authorization are important. Next to that, make sure that you always use the principle of least privilege, meaning not like in the old days where every developer used to be an administrator on all servers all around the world because they had to be able to deploy and change some things. No, only just enough access and just-in-time access, if possible. It's not always possible, but with most new capabilities we are offering, and most players in the world are offering, these things are coming more and more up on top of our minds. Imply policies which are adaptive and flexible, and protect against these out-of-band issues. So at least you have alerting, that you have monitoring on top of those, and that you can work against those if they occur. And then third one is, and the most important part is, always assume breach. If we take a look on how hackers work, they typically are already in your network a couple of months or a couple of weeks before something really exposes. So it's really important that you always have that mindset of, there's a breach that we have. There's always somebody snooping around in our applications or working along with it. So this is why we're having this conversation, because attackers, they try to come into your assets and try to identify the least, the way with the least friction. And they try to get in that. It could be anything. either by a stolen phone, phishing, whatever you have. So you need to have a trust enablement there, and that zero trust conversation, that's very important. So there's a lot of entry points that we're having there. And the most important part here is that the identity becomes the most primary control in that case. User access and productivity are being managed today through the identity. People can work from anywhere. And this is why we're focusing specifically on identity for the ISV and for the SaaS applications, because this will be your first line of defense. And as I said, in that case, identity becomes or is the control plane. In that case, our dearly beloved Azure Active Directory becomes the control plane for not only what you're doing today on managing your software for your customers, everything that you do in Azure, for instance, or of M365 or Dynamics for that matter, depending on what kind of solutions that you're building. But also your customers can benefit from this. And this is something they trust and that they know, because there's already policies in place and already things in place that they can use and that they know. So Microsoft Active Directory is actually the first thing that you should be implementing. Now, we'll say it a couple of times. I will talk on typically what will happen below the covers, meaning the software architecture that you're building that needs to be maintained, but also some of the things that your customers can use in combination with the software that you're building. Yeah. One of the things that we are doing here with Azure Active Directory is that you're, first of all, you set out the identity management no longer as at the ISV side, but at the customer side. The customer becomes the main owner of the identity. The only thing that you do as an ISV is making sure that they can consume the identities and validate against the identity of the customer, meaning against the organization of the customer. So as an ISV, you get a benefit that you don't have to worry about that. So you use any kind of user all over the world, they can onboard into your apps, and they can use single sign-on and even automated user lifecycle without you as an ISV having to worry about that, because that will be handled at the customer side. Even password reset, you don't have to worry anymore about sending clear passwords, clear text passwords inside of a mail. And God forgive that you do this, because this is really not a very good use case or a very good way of doing it. It's even very risky because somebody can compromise that mail with a man in the middle attack. Yeah. This also means that you have credentials. They can now have strong authentication, strong passwording, even passwordless access to your solutions in a very easy way with tools that they already know. They can enable MFA and use that one. And there's so many more tools that they can use. If we take a look at Active Directory today, what is in there, single sign-in and multi-factor authentication are the de facto things that come to mind for the ease of use of the end user. This makes their life very easy, and it really adds up to their productivity. But other things also apply, specifically in the light of zero trust capabilities. If we take a look at the zero trust capabilities where AAD lands, we have, first of all, the identities in AAD, but we also have all these other things that we can talk about, like Defender for Identity, for instance, Microsoft Defender for the endpoint management, combined with Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Next to that, we also have things like Microsoft Defender for Cloud, information protection, and Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. These are the things that I will gently touch upon, and where you as an ISV solution builder, you can benefit from. You can benefit from, and where you can continue building upon. Even your infrastructure and your applications will be safeguarded through that, and the customer can actually manage those. Now, if we take a look at the zero trust access, my slides are willing to collaborate. If you're taking a look at the zero trust access, you can now identify where there is user risk, or where there is a device risk. And you can all provide these in conditional ways and make sure that they apply to certain policies that you apply to. All your customers can apply with MFA, a third-party MFA, and they can start incorporating them into your accesses without you as an ISV having to build that specifically yourself, which is really, really cool because you win a lot of time. On the compliance part, you can also check that as an end user. So as a customer of these SaaS applications, they can also check on what's going on there, because they know which users are trying to access the application, which users are accessing from where, and we can even set policies upon those that people cannot just access from anywhere in the world, but only from certain parts of the world with conditional access. And there's so many things that you can do here on that level, but even you as an ISV builder can use these to manage your Azure estate, for instance, making sure that RBAC is applied on the same ways, that you have MFA enabled for your administrators of your Azure environments. And these conditional accesses can also apply there, making sure that only people from within your own premises can access the Azure portal or the Azure resources, and so on and so on. Talking about Azure, when you're building an application, it's not only about the identity plane, which Sander will go a little bit more into depth, but there's a lot of other tools where AAD comes into. We talk about an entire native security landscape, whether it's with the management plane, whether it's on the data plane, whether it's on the governance plane. All these controls can be managed through Active Directory. So you as an owner, an organization owner, an ISV owner can benefit from this too. Not only from a specific user point of view, but also by the use of service principals and enterprise applications, by the use of managed identities to manage secure accesses between the services, and so that no cross correlation or no cross contamination can happen between different tenants, for instance, if you're building multi-tenant systems, and so on and so on. So identity becomes really the key player here. And that is very important. That's a very important key takeaway here. Since we offer so many things, we need a lot of monitoring on that level too. I'm going to show you a couple of things that are important. First of all, from the ISV point of view to monitor those things, but also from your customer point of view, what they can do to monitor the access, correct access to your application itself. And we're going to start off by looking at Microsoft Defender for Cloud first. Why is this important? Why is there an impact of identity? Because you will probably know, for those who know Defender for Cloud, which used to be called Microsoft Azure Security Center, you know that this is a environment monitoring on two levels. You have workload protection and you have security posture on the other side. And this will be a security management overview view, not only, by the way, in Azure, but also in a hybrid way. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is because typically as an ISV, you want to give a correct solution to your customers, and you want to adhere, if you are in certain industries, you want to adhere to certain compliances and regulations. And as an ISV, you need to be able to monitor those. Now, we offer protection on multiple levels with Defender for Cloud. And one of these things that we also do is monitoring the entire resources inside of Azure itself. The things that come along with it and that can play together again with it is also with the Microsoft Defender. And they have a way of integrating with each other, and they will be outputted then again as a combined monitoring in Microsoft Sentinel. Now, when we take a look at the Defender for Cloud specific parts and the application parts, it may not be too bad to have a little overview demo here. So I'm going to open my Azure portal. And as you can see here, I have my Microsoft Defender for Cloud overview here. What I'm going to take a look at, first of all, is the regulatory compliance. What we do underneath the covers is monitor everything if you set it up correctly, and make sure that you can apply to certain compliances and regulations. Now, one of the things that most companies try to achieve is an ISO 27001. And there's an impact to identity there, because we are monitoring whether the organization of information is being managed in a correct way. one of the points of ISO 27001 is that you have an internal organization which has segregation of duties. And as you can see here, all these little check marks are green. These all apply to things that I've deployed in my Azure subscription and are being monitored thanks to Microsoft Defender for Cloud enablement with the standard features. If we take a look at it a bit deeper, you will actually see that this will come by to a maximum of 3 owners should be designated, and there should be more than 1 owner assigned to subscriptions. Now, you would probably say, what does this have to do with identity? Actually, everything, because this comes down to the role-based access control and monitoring of that on how many users actually have full ownership of our subscription, and do all the others have lesser and lesser privileges to make sure that you don't have anybody overshooting the full admins, meaning that they can just fully compromise the entire subscription. Second of all, there should be more than 1 owner assigned to the subscription. This is to make sure that there's always a fail-safe. So these two come across with it. I also have access control that you can monitor upon, which is also a part of the ISO 27001. And as you can see, you can actually fully down build the entire ISO 27001 and making sure that you comply to all those regulations, even though with identity. As you can see here, user access management, you have management of privileged access rights to specific services, and this can be monitored very deep according to the specs of the regulation that you're building upon. It's not only this one that comes out of the box, but there's many others, and depending on the kind of regulation that you want to apply to, you can actually implement it or implement it yourself by building your own policies on top of that. There's many more like these. They're specific for there's some specific for certain industries, and they can just be downloaded, like NHS, like HIPAA, but there's also PCI, as you can see. There's a NIST, there's some for other industries that are already there, FedRAMP governments, if you have them, if you want to have those kind of environments ready. Yeah. This will help you to achieve your own regulatory compliance, and you can actually use this kind of as a help to provide to your customers, look, we're doing this, and we're doing this in the correct way. Next to that, which I just did, I also want to talk to you a little bit about Microsoft Defender for Cloud apps, or which used to be called Microsoft Cloud App Security. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because you're building as an ISV software, but your customers want to make sure that only people that have access can access it, but also that they apply to certain policies on top of that, from only trusted devices, from only trusted locations where the conditional access is allowed. Are they uploading certain files in there that they shouldn't be, and so on and so on. And you really want to monitor that. Now, as an ISV, you can consume certain APIs within the application by means of using their identity. And Sander will explain you how you will do that. I will just quickly show you a little tip of the veil on what is going to happen there. But you can actually talk to the Graph API. The Graph API will allow you to read out certain security things too. You always, as a user of an organization, always have the right to read out certain attributes from the Graph API. The Graph API is actually everything that nourishes the underlying AAD. Yeah, and this will give you a full overview of everything that's going on inside of your organization. That can be Office side, that can be Dynamic side, but it could also be security side and AAD side. So it's one single Graph API that you're talking to, and we call it the Microsoft Graph. Now, one of the things that you can read out is device health, and you can make sure that this application cannot be used if it's an unhealthy device, for instance. So you can actually work together with the Cloud App Security or Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Yeah. What we can do then is making sure that if you're using any kind of app, they can be discovered, showing which users are using what, and if they are at risk. And from there out, you can actually say that you can have sanctions against them, non-sanctions against them, or just not see them as a threat. And then from there out, you can start building up your policies and making sure that these things can be identified as vulnerable. And this is something a customer can do if you make your app discoverable in the correct way. Yeah? Most apps do have a certain kind of API that they call, but if they're integrated with identity, you will immediately see that, right? And these are some examples where the CSAB or the Defender for Cloud apps can be used. These are some of the use cases. There's already a lot of apps out of the box that work together with them. There's comprehensive session security and use policies for most of these apps, and your app can be built just the same way, and they can just exploit the same principles and the same benefits here. To give you some examples here, we have GitHub, which is highly integrated, but also Adobe, DocuSign, Box, Dropbox, if you want to monitor those files. So there's a lot of things and a lot of examples of other ISVs because they're also ISVs. Now, GitHub is a little bit special because it's Microsoft, but we also provide you this. Some of the key capabilities here is really the conditional access, and this is how a little bit how it works out of the box. You can base yourself upon any kind of device, any kind of location, any kind of client, and all these conditions must be met before you can actually allow access to any of these on the right hand side. We can allow and block, we can limit the access, we can require MFA or force a password reset if necessary. If they are not there, we can fully block the user. There's a lot of things that you can do out of the box and making sure that your access to corporate assets aren't abused. Again, to our cloud, to any other cloud SaaS applications which you as an ISV are building, and this is why we are so eager to mention this, because it's not only about you building the application, it's also how the customer can react to this. So what you can do, I'm just going to show you a quick highlight on how Defender for Cloud is looking. Like for instance, here I have some applications that I'm looking into. This is Defender for Cloud apps, the dashboard. You have immediately alerts that you can take a look at, all the apps that are installed, things that you need to investigate upon. You can either find this as a separate portal, portal.cloudappsecurity.com, or you can find it underneath the Microsoft 365 security dashboard, which you can find here. That's Microsoft 365 FM, and you can find them here also. So it doesn't matter where you've come from, but this is the cleanest. This is actually the cleanest screen that we have. So here we have Defender for Cloud Apps. So if you go into the dashboard, you will see all the alerts that are covering up. We have all the discovered apps in our organization, and your apps as an ISV can show up here. If you do an integration with Active Directory, they will show up, and you can even integrate with the graph, so that way you can also show back what are you doing with the entire environment. And to give you an idea, there's a lot of them here. Let's say, for instance, that you want to take a look at Jira, for instance, which is a very commonly used IT tool. Here you can see, oh, not finding it. Yeah, but there's no tagging. So there should be in the cloud app. It's not discovered in my organization, but it is available as a from the cloud catalog. So if I take a look here in apps itself, you will see that Jira will pop up as a productivity tool. So all the ISV, all the most important ISVs apps are already there as a cloud catalog, and you can just onboard them, or you can have them discovered by means of your laptops, by means of your devices that are being managed in Endpoint Manager, and then they can be set up. And all these discovered apps, and from there out, we can actually say, yeah, they're risky. Like for instance, I can say here all the apps with a certain score. 3, so risk score 3 is a very low score, meaning very vulnerable and very very hostile. We can say here, for instance, let's go for TWiki, for instance. We can actually say here, this app, we can actually sanction it, and we can actually, there's a lot of users using it, 11, there's some traffic going outside, and from here out, I can actually go and say, I want to tag this app as a sanctioned app or an unsanctioned app, and then from here out I can also create some actions saying I want to block these apps, configure uploads, and so on and so on. So your end users are fully in control also of the SaaS application, what users can do with it, to make sure that they don't upload any data that shouldn't be in there, for instance. Very important. That brings us to a full extent of your application being inside of an environment where you can bring thousands of apps to your customers, not only yours but others, and you can even integrate with those others if you just have that link, by the means of one single identity and all the tools surrounding that. But building those things, that's another story. And for that, I'm going to hand over to my dear friend and colleague Sander, because he will tell you all about it, how to do the implementation of all the things that I just mentioned here, and make sure that your apps show up on these things. Sander, the floor is yours.
My screen, then yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, so as Mike has told, for customers using IT technology that want to use SaaS applications, there's a lot of tools how they can control these SaaS applications. And actually, for a lot of customer, it's becoming mandatory to do that. They want to be in control who is using their third-party SaaS applications if they are not running in their own environment, but they're just, well, bought via a subscription. For that, to implement, we have the Microsoft Identity Platform. The Microsoft Identity Platform is a big set of tools, SDKs, which you can actually use to build your application, to adopt to be able to be part of the cloud applications, as Mike just mentioned. Well, with the Microsoft Identity Platform, so what can it do for you? It can actually delegate the identity and access management to the Microsoft identity. So you don't have to build in your own identity store anymore, but you can delegate that to the Azure Id or the Azure B2C. That means that users are going to authenticate with their own corporate account. So it's not that that you're going to give as an ISV to hand out account, username, passwords, or other ways, but they will authenticate with their own account, which allows, for instance, a single sign-on with their own account into your application. It also means that they can authorize and use RBAC, which is managed by your customer. So the customer can give a user a role, and that's the role that you can use in your application. And it all means that you can comply with the zero trust policies of your customers when they're using the Azure AD. And if you want to be part of that and you want to have that checkbox on the RFP, you can use the Microsoft Identity Platform in order to build that. And I have to click here and then next. So for that, it all starts with the Microsoft Azure AD Enterprise application. So I will a little bit go top down. So what Mike told as a cloud app, that is actually being shown in the Azure AD as an enterprise application. So that's the container that contains all the information about a cloud app, and it will actually have some of the benefits. It will introduce a sign-in friction, or reduce sign-in friction. The user is already logged on with their Azure AD or Office 365 account, and it can seamlessly sign in into your application. It will increase your app visibility, not only for the administrators, but also for the users. So within Azure AD, we have the myapp.microsoft.com, where all the applications that you have access to as an employee or an Azure AD user, and your application can also be part of that. So it will be easier for the employees or the consumers of your application within an organization to find and to start your application. And it gives an easy way for the app deployment, because there are some hoops that you have to go into to get your application deployed, to have single sign-on working, to get the right access. So it makes it easier for the IT admin to do all the deployment. And I will get some more information later. So if you go to the Azure AD and there's an enterprise app, this is actually where your app, if you have an ISV application, SaaS application created, and your customer is actually using it, it will end up on the enterprise app. In there, you can do all the the tooling and the configuration and the security settings, as Mike has mentioned. So you can say, well, this is the conditional access. We can set consent and permissions policies. You can see who is actually logged on to which application. So that's all done within the enterprise application blade of Azure AD. And with that, if you go to one application, you will see the same thing. So in here, there's a test application and to-do list client, and I will show that in a demo. And in here, you can actually set the properties of this application. So assume that you are an ISV, you have a great application, it's called to-do, and it has a client and an API, and your the customer is actually using this application and it shows up in their enterprise applications. It means that they can set conditional access on your application. So they can decide this application can be used if, and there can be all kind of rules on a certain device in a certain place in the world, and all kind of rules can be made if and how your application can be used. They can also assign the users to your application. So they can define this set of users is allowed to log into this application, and this set is not. So for instance, you have an HR application, and you only allow the people that are from the HR department to log into your application. So your customer can actually configure that, and that's not something that you have to do into your application. Single sign-on, you can set up single sign-on. If you just use Azure AD with OAuth and OpenID, that's quite easy, but it's also possible, for instance, to do SAML and to more complex single sign-on scenarios. And the last thing is that you can actually configure the provisioning of users from your customer into your user database. It might be that you need to have a user database, so you can have some kind of authentication tables, or you need to have information about your user in your application. And what you want to have is some kind of synchronization, or at least a feed. There is a new user within your customer's organization. You want to know that and to add that user also into your application. Typical that's done nowadays via a lot of Excel sheets, typical batch processes where new users and removed users are being synced. You can actually use a process with a protocol, standard protocol called SCIM, and you can automate that process. And then you can set some self-service actions. How can people actually go to the application, acquire access to the application? So you can set some self-service actions on top of that application. So for one of the most important ones is actually that the customers can assign users to your applications, but they can also assign roles to your applications. So if you have an application, you as an application developer, you just say, well, my application has a certain set of roles. Oh, and I thought there was a screen for that, but I will show it in a demo. So I have a user, and this user is a writer, or this user is a reader, or it's an admin, or it is a manager. So you can define these rules, and your customer can actually set the role for that user, and it flows to your application, and then you can use it within your application. Well, in order to give that some background, some small demo of the enterprise applications. So if you go to Azure AD, you have Azure AD in there, you have the enterprise applications, and here you see a list of enterprise applications that are actually running for this customer, which is of course a demo customer. In here, you can have a view. You can say, well, I have my Contoso app or DocuSign or ServiceNow, but then I have my to-do list client application. And in here, you can set a number of things. So you can, for instance, you can set the users and groups. And one of the things is that you can actually set, well, this is a user, has access to this application, but you can also add other users and groups. Well, in my test tenant, I cannot add groups, but if you have a P2 license, you can also add groups to this assignment. And you can say, well, this set of users. So for instance, I'm going to add a user, which is user 1. And I select it, and I can give it a role. So in the application to do, there are 3 roles: an admin, a reader, and a writer. And I can say, well, this user is a writer, and then I can assign it access. So this is done in the context of the user that actually is configuring your application and assigning roles to their users for your application, which is a very powerful thing, and you don't have to do it and to build it into your application yourself. So that's an interesting side effect for that. It will allow you to have a smaller part of your application that you do have to build yourself. So that's for the demo of the enterprise application. And in order for the enterprise application, so you can there are 2 ways actually to get your application into the environment of the customer. One is, well, you can send them a link, and then an administrator can click the link and they can give consent. Another one is something that we call the Azure Ad Gallery. The gallery is a marketplace which contains a large number of applications, SaaS applications, that are easily to integrate with the Azure AD. So normally you have your application, you need to know the administrator of the customer. You're going to send some emails. This is the link that you have to click. This is the configuration that you have to do, and that's something that you can automate and make them much easier for the customers. Of course, it will also allow you to have a broader range and to scale, because you cannot have an email or a one-on-one conversation with all of your customers. So for that is the Azure AD Gallery. The store, it's actually you have to publish your app in there. It is being trusted because there's a validation of Microsoft before your application can actually be in the store. So we have to trust the partner. So there's a validation that you are a real partner, and there's also a validation on the technology that there is no spooky stuff inside your application, or at least in the identity and in the login procedure. A last point is that it will allow you an easy configuration of the account synchronization using SCIM. SCIM is the standard for account synchronization. So if you're in the Azure AD Gallery, you can make it very easy for your customers to attach or to incorporate your application as a cloud app into their environment. In order to do that, you have to go to the Azure AD Gallery network, and then you can actually apply, and you can say, this is my application, and the link is below how to get there and what the procedure is to get there. You go to this site, you say, well, I want to submit my application, and then you go into a flow where your application is being checked, and then in the end you will be part of the Azure AD Gallery, and you will be findable both in the Azure AD or in the portal in the Azure AD enterprise application, and you will be findable on App Source if you search on Azure AD applications. There are some things that you need to do. So either you need, well, at least you need to have an authentication with Azure AD, either via OpenID and OAuth, or with SAML or VSVET. And optional, you can implement SCIM but for automatic provisioning. Within the gallery, you will see with icons what kind of application you are, and so people can search, I would like to have an application that integrates with SCIM, and you can filter all the applications in there. So that's a very powerful thing. The process is pretty lightweight. So once you have an application which actually uses Azure AD as a multi-tenant application, you're actually fit to go to the site, fill in some marketing information, and then there's the test process goes, and in about a week, a little bit more than a week, your application is live. Then one topic on the user provisioning. It is very helpful. So part of the identity framework that we have is to make it very easy to do user provisioning, and to have the users of your customers synced with your application. A lot of applications are already doing that, and for instance, a lot of problems that you can overcome are things like there's an employee has left the company of your customers. You want to know, so they should not have access anymore, or they change roles. These kind of things you can actually do, and there is a lot of functionality within Skim to automate that process. Within Azure AD, there's a webhook. That webhook will send you information that you can actually use to process into your own data store. Well, if you want to integrate your application with the Azure AD, there's actually one step that you always have to do, and that's similar to steps that you also do in other platforms. So if you maybe want to have an application using Facebook, you have to register your application. The same with Azure AD. If you want to make a multi-tenant application, you have to register your app in Azure AD. The thing is, you go to Azure AD, you go to register, you go to app registrations. You say, I want to have my app registered, and probably in the case of a SaaS application, you either choose the second bullet, which is accounts in any organizations, or in any organization directory plus the Microsoft accounts. The difference between those two is that you only allow users with an Azure AD account, or you also allow them, for instance, with their Hotmail, Outlook, or Amazon account. Once you have registered this application, it exists in your AD. And then you can actually start to configure your application. So your application has an client ID. This will be the ID that actually lives where and I will use my laser. This is actually the ID that your application has, and you can configure it, for instance, with API permissions. I want to have my application using the graph, so you have to set the API permissions. You can also expose your own API. For instance, if you have an API, say this is my API that I exposes, and my application has a number of roles, the things that I showed before. This application has an admin, a writer, and a reader role. And you can make all roles that you would like, and you can actually manage them in here. Once this is done, your application is actually usable, and people can log on into your application. Well, make a step back. If you have an application and you want to actually have APIs. So typical, if you have application with a client and a server, the server has an API and your client needs to access the server, you also create those APIs as an ISV. So you actually make an extra application permission. You make an extra application registration for your API, and you set the scopes for that API. So typical, for instance, you have a Contoso application, and there's a role or a scope that you would like to give, which is Contoso.write, Contoso.read, Contoso.add. That are the application permissions you give, and that's actually what you can use in your own application to give to get access using an access token. So once you have done that, so you have made a client, you've made an API, you have to hook them up in the proper way. That's all very nicely described how to do that. There's one important step that you have to do, and that important step is publisher verification. If a user, or if a customer is going to log on to your application in a multi-tenant application, they have to give consent to your application. Suppose you have an application, that application has the permissions to go to Graph or to go to your own API to write information. They should give consent that your application is allowed to do that. So that's called the consent pane. And this is actually where a user or the administrator of the organization needs to consent your application to do that. So it's very important that the user, your consumer, knows you are a verified application, and they're not just logging into any application. For that, we have a publisher verification. So in the branding part of the registration of your application, you can do the publisher verification, and this is actually done using your MPN account. So if you are a Microsoft partner, you have an MPN account. This account has a domain, and that domain needs to respond with one of the domains within your tenant. So it can be the standard. No, it cannot be the standard tenant, so not the .on Microsoft.com. Needs to be your own tenant. Then there's a verification, and then it's verified that the application is actually from you, and then you get the nice badge as part as the consent screen, and the consumer knows that you are a real application. As an ISV, it's important to know that already since 1.5 years ago, you cannot have an application, a multi-tenant application, that cannot be consented by users anymore if you do not have the publisher verification on. So that's something that you need to do. Else, you can only be consented via the admin, the tenant admin of your customer. So if you are a developer, there is the Microsoft Identity Platform for developers, and that's a number of things. So we have there is a number of endpoints. So the OpenID endpoints, which are on Azure Id. So something that's like the login.microsoftonline.com, where you can actually authorize users. You can actually get tokens. So that all these endpoints are over there. We have a number of SDKs and libraries, which make it very easy for you to build your applications. These libraries are there for all the different and important application platform: React, JavaScript, Angular, .NET, and also use if you want to make them yourself. So for all the different library developer platforms, there are libraries. Then we support the Azure AD, and we also support MSA accounts. And if you use Azure B2C, which I share some information later, there are also all the identities which are supported by the Microsoft Identity Platform. So you can also have your users log on with their Facebook or Google account, or any account which actually supports OpenID or MS or SAML. And it's all built on the industry standards, like shown below. So OAuth and OpenID, SAML, and SCIM. So that's in overall the Microsoft Identity Platform for the developers. And as said, there's a very wide range and a very wide range of samples that you can use to have your application integrated with Azure AD. If you build on Java or JavaScript, or you have a web application or a native iOS application or an Android application, all these different platforms are being supported, and also the different frameworks are supported. And it's a very broad set of samples how you can actually use that to actually incorporate that into your application. Well, next to that, if you have your Azure AD user, actually, if you have your customer logged in with their Azure AD account, and even nicer, if that Azure AD account is also a Microsoft 365 account, it gives you a very wide range of options. Namely, you can use the Graph API. And the Graph API, for the ones that don't know that, is actually the API that goes to Microsoft 365. So it will, you can actually have all the Microsoft 365 experience. You can extend. You can build your own one, and actually you have access, if the end user consents on that, to all the information from that user. So it's either their mail, their files, their chats in Teams. You can add users. You can set all the devices they use. So in theory, you have access to the whole Microsoft 365 environment of your customer if they give consent for that. Of course, that makes it easy. For instance, if you have a Teams application or you want to integrate with Teams, using Graph, you can send a Teams chat to one of the Teams the Teams chats of the customer, or you can send a mail on their behalf, or you can add an event in their calendar. So by using the Azure AD environment, not only you have all the advantages of actually comply with security of your end customer, but also give you ability to access the graph. And then, so in the end, the Microsoft identity is about integrating the security with Azure Id. And here are some very small code samples of actually what you have to do using MSO. So if you have a .NET application, we have a very good SDK. So if in .NET application, only a few lines, 3 lines, if you put them in multiple lines, to add your application to do web authentication using Azure AD. And then the .NET application and all the middleware will automatically handle all the authentication and the access token acquirement and refreshing of that for you. And you can also say, okay, if I can also use authorization based on the roles of my applications, which are being set by the end user, and that's being done. So what you can do in your application. So for instance, you have a policy. This action can only be done if you have the writers policy. You only have one line within your application says, well, authorize for the writers policy, and this means that the only accounts that are being set with the role writer can actually access this application or this method in your application. You don't have to do anything as an ISV. That's all being controlled and managed by your customer. Well, some short time to have a small demo. So if you have an application registration, you go to the Azure AD, and you can actually say, I want to have a new registration. And this is the page where you can do it. You can say, well, I make a multi-tenant application, and then you have registered your application. Sake of time, I already have done that. So for instance, there is an application which contains 2 parts. One is then a client application. And in here, I have said, well, this is my application. I am actually using a number of APIs. So I can say I'm using the Microsoft Graph, and I use my own API, which is the API for the to-do application. And I actually have a number of app roles. So in here, I can say, these are my app roles that I use in my application. And I would be able to say, well, I have a new role. I can say managers and users and group candidate, and that is in the value called managers. And I can give some text in here, and I say apply. And then with that, my application has new roles. Well, this is what you do within your application. And in the customer side, they actually see this back as one of the enterprise applications in your they see your application as one of the enterprise applications back into their enterprise application blade. Well, the nice thing is then once you go to an application, of course you go there and you can all go to this site, and I can say sign in. It's going to call me because of course I have multiple MFA going on, so I have and I should be back. Yep. And I'm logged on into my application where I can actually do the task that I have done. Well, one of the things that if I go to my application and I go back here and I would say, well, my application, the client, and I go to users and groups, and I'm going to remove this client, it would mean that this user will not be able to sign in anymore. So if I do sign out, yes, I will sign out, and I will sign in again. And if everything, that was known, of course. And because I'm in private, I cannot have my. And I will call back me again. It should give a warning. Now it will give me hopefully. Oh no, due to timing, it will take some time before that to be replicated. But you should get an error message here that you're not allowed to enter the application, and that you don't have the permissions to do so. So with that, I actually want to hand over, because we don't have time to go to the B2C, and hand over to Mike.
Yes, I was still muted. I'm sorry. So as you can see, there's a lot of things that you can leverage as an ISV. The one thing that I still want to highlight here is that we have a full impact on everything which is in regards to security. So it's not only identity, and identity is not only security. It is a big part of a bigger whole, and identity fits in everywhere. As you can see, everything inside of security in regards to the solution that you're building here, where it fits into, where it is doing its lateral movement, where it has an impact on the endpoints and devices, where it has an impact on the hybrid infrastructure, or in the information protection and software as a service, identity becomes a very key part, but it's not only that. And for this, I added the cybersecurity reference architecture to have a good, to give you a good overview of all our products that are impacting security from both a customer perspective as you yourself as an ISV perspective. So with that, there's one slide left with all the references, all the documentations, and all the things. I mean, Sandra, if you can just do one slide more forward, you will actually see that. So we added some reference material and resource material here for you. We hoped that you enjoyed our little identity and zero trust and security talk specifically for SaaS builders and ISVs. We hope you learned a little bit about this. And there's only one thing left to say. Thank you. Enjoy the summer, because this was the last. All right. See you all in the next live, or in the next show, or in the next live event, or whatever you have. And with that, back to the studio.